He ordered the execution of 2 of his wives, broke with the Pope, and founded his own church. All because he didn't have a male heir. Henry VIII met a gruesome end befitting one of the most feared monarchs in history. His body became so grotesquely swollen and foul-smelling that it made his attendants faint. After his death, fluids from his corpse leaked out of the coffin and were licked up by a stray dog. Today, we uncover the true story of King Henry VIII's death. Something even more disturbing happened. Ready to hear the real, horrifying end of England's most feared king? Henry VIII was never supposed to wear the crown. Born on June 28, 1491 at Greenwich Palace, he was the second son, an afterthought in the shadow of his elder brother Arthur, who had been trained from birth to rule England. For young Henry, the future likely meant a life in the church or quiet diplomatic duties, but fate had other plans. When Arthur died suddenly at just 15, everything changed. In an instant, Henry was yanked from the sidelines and thrust into the spotlight of a fragile empire. The Tudor dynasty, still fresh from civil war, now depended on a boy who had never been groomed to lead. The throne wasn't built for him, yet it shaped everything he would become. Flawed, powerful, and unforgettable. But was this twist of fate a blessing, or the beginning of something far darker? It was a union that defied divine law, Henry VIII marrying his late brother's widow, Catherine of Aragon. After Prince Arthur's untimely death, Catherine's future in England hung by a thread. Returning her to Spain meant giving back her massive dowry, something King Henry VII had no interest in doing. Instead, a controversial solution emerged. Henry, now the next in line, would marry her. But canon law was clear. Marrying your brother's wife was a sin. To bypass this, the court sought a papal dispensation, claiming Arthur and Catherine's marriage had never been consummated. Pope Julius II granted it, and in 1509, not long after Henry VIII took the throne, Catherine became his queen. It was a marriage rooted in loopholes and politics, one that would quietly sow the seeds of a seismic rupture between crown and church. Was this bold act of defiance against religious tradition the first crack in the Tudor dynasty's foundation? He was a charismatic and athletic young man. Barely 18, he looked more like a mythic hero than a monarch. Broad-shouldered, golden-haired and glowing with health. A Venetian ambassador once said he had an extraordinary figure and angelic countenance, superior in beauty to any other Christian prince. And it wasn't just his looks. Henry was the perfect Renaissance man. He spoke Latin, wrote poetry, and played multiple instruments. At court, he danced, jousted, and hosted grand banquets with effortless charm. People adored him. Nobles admired him. Europe watched him. His rule began as a golden age, radiant, promising, almost too perfect. This was the golden age before the storm. Few could have foreseen how this radiant prince would spiral into tyranny, and fewer still imagined that the very faith he defended would one day become the one he tried to destroy. In his early years, Henry VIII was more than just a king. He saw himself as the sword and shield of Catholicism. In 1521, he published a sharp rebuttal to Martin Luther's teachings, a Latin work titled Defense of the Seven Sacraments. The Pope was so impressed he awarded Henry the title Defender of the Faith, a name still carried by British monarchs today. At the time, Henry portrayed himself as Rome's most loyal servant, devout, doctrinal, and immovable in his belief. But the irony is chilling. It was this very loyalty that fractured into rebellion. When the Pope denied his request to annul his marriage to Catherine of Aragon, Henry's spiritual identity unraveled. He began to question whether marrying his brother's widow had offended God, especially since every male heir they conceived had died. Only a daughter, Mary, survived. To Henry, this wasn't just bad fortune, it was a sign, a curse. And in a kingdom forged by war, with a new dynasty barely holding on, one healthy son meant everything. His faith clashed with his fear, and ultimately, power won. Can a man truly serve both God and the throne without betraying one? When Anne Boleyn arrived at court, she didn't just catch the king's eye. She turned the entire kingdom on its head. Henry VIII was mesmerized not by her beauty, but by her boldness. Anne refused to be another royal mistress passed quietly through the shadows. She wanted more. She demanded the crown. From their very first exchanges in the mid-1520s, this was no ordinary love story. It was a high-stakes chess match of politics, power and ambition. Henry begged Pope Clement VII to annul his marriage to Catherine of Aragon, claiming it had been invalid from the start. But the Pope, caught in a political bind, stalled. That's when Henry snapped. If the Church wouldn't release him, he would break the Church. In 1534, with the Act of Supremacy, Parliament crowned Henry the head of a new Church of England. Rome was out. Monasteries were looted, dissenters persecuted, and a new era of reform, some imposed by force, began. Anne wasn't simply a seductress or a pawn. She was a catalyst. In chasing her crown, she helped forge a new kind of monarchy, one where the king didn't kneel to Rome but ruled with unchecked spiritual and political might. He married 6 times, 6 women, 6 fates, and not a single happy ending. Henry VIII's love life has often been romanticized, but in truth, it was a procession of heartbreak, humiliation, and in 2 cases, death by execution. These marriages weren't grand love stories. They were tactical maneuvers in a game where only the king was allowed to win. Catherine of Aragon, his first queen, gave him loyalty, diplomacy, and a daughter, Mary. But when she failed to produce a son, she was cast aside like a spent pawn, exiled and humiliated after decades of faithful service. Then came Anne Boleyn, brilliant, enigmatic, and bold enough to demand a crown. But when her promised son never arrived and political tides turned, Henry called her a traitor and had her beheaded. Jane Seymour brought Henry his long-awaited male heir, Edward, yet in a cruel twist, she died from childbirth complications just days later. Her death, some say, was the only one he truly mourned. Next came Anne of Cleves, a German princess whom Henry rejected on sight. The marriage was annulled in 6 months. She was lucky, mocked, but spared. Catherine Howard, however, was not so fortunate. Barely out of adolescence, she was swept into Henry's court as his rose without a thorn. But when rumors of infidelity surfaced, she too was sent to the scaffold, beheaded at just 19. Finally, Catherine Parr, a clever survivor who managed to outlive him, largely by steering clear of scandal and quietly navigating the king's dangerous moods. And here's the uncomfortable question history keeps whispering. If a man can destroy what he once loved so completely, was it ever love at all? No one could have imagined that this young man, full of life, would end his life in utter decadence, obese, infected, plagued and rotting, even while still alive. A fateful turning point occurred in January 1536. At 44 years old, during a jousting tournament in Greenwich, Henry suffered a terrible accident when his horse fell on him. The king remained unconscious for 2 hours. Although he survived, the injury to his right leg would never completely heal. This wound was not only persistent but transformed into an open ulcer that constantly seeped, causing the king unbearable pain. Over time, the ulcer worsened to the point where bones were visible through the decomposing flesh. Gangrene later began to set in his legs in the final months of his life. The pain tormented him, causing him to often scream and curse those around him, at times falling into deep melancholy. Contemporary medical treatments such as cauterization with hot iron or using mixtures containing arsenic and mercury are now known to have been harmful and likely worsened his condition. Perhaps the worst aspect was the nauseatingly foul odor emanating from the wound. The stench was so ghastly that his presence could be detected 3 rooms away. Courtiers were obligated to endure the smell without showing revulsion, often using handkerchiefs soaked in perfume or vinegar to cover their noses when near him, under penalty of facing the king's wrath. Due to the chronic wound and pain-making movement and exercise impossible, Henry began to gain weight uncontrollably and became severely obese. His waist size increased from 89 centimeters in his youth to over 130 centimeters, and he weighed over 180 kilograms, almost 400 pounds. He needed a special pulley system to move between rooms, and door frames in the palaces had to be widened. His daily diet of approximately 5,000 calories, mainly from red meats with very few vegetables, along with large quantities of wine and beer, contributed significantly to this decline. Obesity caused him heart problems, gout, and possibly diabetes. Modern experts believe he likely suffered from diabetes, severe gout, hypertension, and heart failure. Some suggest syphilis, although this diagnosis is disputed. Special armor and beds also had to be made for him due to his size. His physical condition transformed him into a moody, sedentary, and increasingly irritable man. The deteriorating health not only affected his physical state but also profoundly altered Henry VIII's personality. He became irritable, morose, and increasingly difficult. Coupled with physical pain, he became increasingly paranoid and suspicious, obsessed with imaginary conspiracies. His extreme fear of illness, hypochondria, especially the plague, worsened his paranoia. He became distrustful and secretive, fearing poisoning to the point of implementing an elaborate food security system, requiring servants to taste every dish before it reached him. Some historians suggest the brain injury from the 1536 fall may have exacerbated existing tendencies toward paranoia and fits of rage. This personality transformation led to ruthless and bloody decisions. From a defender of the Catholic Church, he broke with the Pope and became the scourge of Catholicism in England. He became brutal with his enemies, tolerating no dissent, executing even those who opposed him on grounds of conscience, such as the humanist Thomas More. His paranoia caused him to carry out executions based on unfounded suspicions, putting to death even close friends and loyal advisors. Notably, the execution of his second wife, Anne Boleyn, under fabricated accusations, coincided with the time of his accident in 1536. His fifth wife, Catherine Howard, was also executed after being accused of infidelity, perhaps partly because she could not bear her deformed and malodorous husband. Even in his state of physical decline, he still ruled with an iron fist. In his final years, the physical torment reached almost unimaginable levels. He could barely move, even with help. His breathing was heavy. Episodes of delirium became frequent. Witnesses reported that during these moments he often murmured the names of his deceased wives, particularly Jane Seymour. Although his condition was clearly terminal, no one at court dared to suggest that the king was dying, as English law considered predicting the monarch's death treason. It was only when he realized death was imminent on January 27, 1547, that Henry allowed Archbishop Thomas Cranmer to be called. Unable to speak, he squeezed Cranmer's hand when asked if he died in the Christian faith. This was his last conscious gesture. In the early hours of January 28, 1547, at 55 years of age, the once powerful king exhaled his last breath. But the indignity regarding his physical condition did not end with his death. Due to his enormous size, a special coffin had to be constructed. Preparing the body for the funeral was a horrifying challenge, and the body began to decompose rapidly. During the transfer to his burial place, or while the coffin rested awaiting burial, as it was inadequately sealed, the coffin swelled and burst due to internal pressure. Putrid liquid spilled onto the chapel floor, creating a repugnant scene. According to contemporary accounts, stray dogs discovered and licked the foul liquid. Although the detail about the dogs may be a legend, the rapid decomposition and horrifying spectacle were certain. This was a profoundly humiliating end, a stark reflection of both the physical and moral decay he had suffered. As the English historian Alison Weir wrote, "It is one of the great paradoxes of history that a man who began with so much promise, beauty, and ability ended as a grotesque caricature of himself, tormented by physical pain and mental instability, feared and flattered by those around him, but rarely truly loved." Henry VIII's horrible death is a powerful reminder of the limits of human power. The man who rewrote the laws of his nation to satisfy his desires could not rewrite the laws of nature. In the end, even the most powerful of kings must face the same fate as the humblest subject. His death, with his labored breathing and deformed body, contrasts dramatically with the official portraits that show him in all his royal majesty. Despite the gruesome end, Henry VIII's legacy endures. Ironically, the male heir he so desperately sought, to the point of breaking with Rome and executing 2 wives, was his fragile son Edward VI, who died young. His true legacy came through his daughters, particularly Elizabeth I, the daughter of the wife he executed, who led England into a golden age. So that is the story of Henry VIII's health decline and horrifying death, a chilling testament to how absolute power combined with chronic illness can transform an individual. His life ended not with glory but with an unbearable stench and an end unworthy of his crown.